Hello, dear participants. Today we will discuss humanity's unsolvable question. Is there a God waiting in the heavens or anywhere else? While I argue for the non-existence of a God, our friend Redwise will try to prove that one exists. Most likely, not everyone will agree on this question, neither in this debate nor hereafter. Perhaps the answer to the question is not scientific but psychological. But of course, there may be those who change their minds. After watching the debate, we want to see and discuss your valuable thoughts in the comments. Let's start the debate from the very foundation, from the functioning of the universe. Throughout history, science has filled the gaps attributed to God one by one. It used to be believed that Zeus struck the lightning and that diseases were spread by evil spirits. Today, however, we know electromagnetism and microbiology. God is a temporary placeholder used by humans for things they do not know. The complexity of the universe does not require a designer. The second law of thermodynamics and entropy explain how systems evolve. Natural selection has brought about biological complexity over millions of years of trial and error without any conscious intervention. If every complex structure requires a designer, then wouldn't that designer, God, also need an even more complex designer? This leads us to an infinite regression. Science shows us that complex structures can arise from simple rules. The universe is a self-sufficient machine that operates according to the laws of physics. The God hypothesis is an unnecessary complexity, according to the principle of Occam's razor.
Blue glass, by using the God of the gaps argument, actually mistakes science's answer to the question of how for philosophy's answer to the question of why. Science's explanation of how lightning strikes does not eliminate the will behind existence. It merely explains the method of that will. The real issue is this: why is there something rather than nothing? If the universe operates according to physical laws, where did these laws come from? Physical laws cannot create themselves. Furthermore, the fine-tuning in the universe cannot be ignored. If the gravitational constant or atomic forces were different by even a tiny fraction, stars would not form, and life could not emerge. This is as impossible as an explosion randomly creating an encyclopedia. The infinite regression problem that Blue Glass mentions is solved by God being, by nature, a timeless and causeless first cause. If matter and time have a beginning, the Big Bang, the thing that triggered this beginning must be outside of time and matter. That is, it must be supernatural.
What Redwise calls fine-tuning is actually a survivorship bias. Because we exist in this universe, the universe appears suitable to us. If it weren't suitable, we wouldn't be here discussing it anyway. But the real logical collapse lies within the attributes of God. If God is perfectly good, perfectly powerful, and perfectly wise, why do this immense suffering and evil exist in the world? Epicurus' paradox is still valid. Does God want to prevent evil but is not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. If he is both able and willing, then where does evil come from? The death of children from genetic diseases or natural disasters cannot be explained by the free will argument. A perfect designer does not produce a flawed and painful creation. The cruelty in nature points not to a merciful creator, but to blind and emotionless physical processes. Morality is not a revelation coming from God, but an evolutionary cooperation mechanism developed by our species for survival.
The problem of evil is not actually an argument against God's existence, but a reproach regarding God's unfathomability. While Blue Glass speaks of evil, he actually appeals to an objective standard of good and evil. If there is no God, and we are just piles of atoms, there is no moral difference between the death of a child and the extinguishing of a star. Both are simply the displacement of matter. The fact that you are disturbed by the existence of evil is in fact proof of that search for divine justice in your soul. That is, proof of God. Furthermore, science, which explains matter, is silent in the face of consciousness. How does the sending of electrical signals by neurons create the feeling of self, the beauty of a color, or the sadness of a poem? Matter cannot explain subjective experience, qualia. Consciousness is not a biological byproduct, but a fundamental building block of the universe. Matter did not give birth to consciousness. On the contrary, the supreme consciousness, God, behind everything, uses matter as a form of expression. If we were merely algorithms, our concepts of reality and truth would have no value, because our thoughts would be nothing but chemical reactions programmed solely for survival.
Consciousness is a function of complex nervous systems, and the fact that it hasn't been fully explained yet doesn't mean it is magical. History is full of examples where the unexplained has always turned into the unknown, and then into the known. Man's search for meaning does not mean that the universe has a meaning. We are living beings who came into existence by chance on a small cloud of dust in a massive and empty universe. This reality may seem cold, but it is the honest one. Belief in God is a psychological defense mechanism created against the fear of death and uncertainty. Man has created a father figure in his own image and worshipped it. If God exists and wants to communicate with us, why is he so silent? Why are there thousands of different religions and contradictory sacred texts? A real God would not leave his evidence to human interpretation or geographical luck. Knowledge relies on experiment and observation. Faith begins where evidence ends. Science provides us with freedom because it frees us from submitting to an invisible authority.
God's silence is for the purpose of allowing man to choose freely and to be able to turn toward him like a friend rather than like a robot. Evidence is everywhere, but light means nothing to an eye that refuses to see. In Blue Glass's world, we are just temporary biological machines, full of faulty data. If God does not exist, justice will never be served. Love will be just a neurochemical trick, and at the end of life, only a dark nothingness will await us. However, logic tells us that information precedes matter. The letters of a book consist of paper and ink, but the meaning of the book does not belong to the paper. It belongs to the author. The universe is a book containing immense information. We are able to read this information because our minds speak the same language as the mind that designed the universe. God is not just the driving force at the beginning of the universe, but the source of being that sustains existence at every moment. Consequently, even the logic you use to prove the non-existence of God draws its power from your unshakable belief that the universe is based on a rational foundation. That is, it draws its power from God.
Redwise claims that morality cannot be grounded without God, but this is a very dangerous and erroneous proposition. Morality is not a set of rules handed down from above, but a byproduct of our species' millions of years of struggle for survival. Even in primate groups, we observe primitive forms of mutual sacrifice and the sense of justice. Stealing is bad in a society because this behavior disrupts the fabric of society and ultimately threatens the survival of the species. The source of morality is biological evolution and the social contract. If a person does good only because God is watching, that person is not actually moral, just obedient. Goodness done without the fear of God is much purer and more valuable. Furthermore, we see how moral commandments in sacred books have changed over historical processes. Slavery was once legitimate, but today it is not. If morality came from an absolute God, how would we explain these changes? Humanity can build a perfect moral system through rational empathy and scientific data, such as the capacity for suffering, without the need for God.
Blue Glass's theory of evolutionary morality reduces ethics to a mere survival trick. If morality were just a biological necessity, then there would be no qualitative difference between the sacrifice a mother makes for her child and the behavior of an ant colony. If God does not exist, good and evil would be nothing more than cultural preferences. What makes what the Nazis did evil? Is it only that they lost the war? Or is it because the majority of humanity felt that way? If everyone decided tomorrow that evil was good, would evil then become good? A true and objective morality requires an unchanging reference point above man. We are not just biological machines. Within us, there is a thirst for absolute justice and goodness. This thirst is the greatest sign that there is a water source outside of this universe. Differences in the interpretation of sacred texts relate to human limitation, but fundamental values like justice, mercy, and truth are reflections of God's unchanging character. Without God, morality is a fortress built on sand. Its shape changes with every storm.
Let's talk about mathematics and logic. Redwise sees mathematics as the language of God, but mathematics is actually the most refined language invented by humans to understand the patterns in the universe. Nature is not mathematical. We use mathematical models to give meaning to nature. For example, the number pi or the constant e are consequences of the geometric relationships in the fabric of the universe, not the codes of a divine design. Laws of logic, such as the principle of non-contradiction, are consequences of the consistent functioning of the universe. If the universe were chaotic, logic wouldn't exist either. Since we evolved within this consistent universe, our brains must operate according to logical rules. The success of mathematics over the physical world is not a miracle, but our insistence on describing that world mathematically. An architect using geometry while building a house does not mean that geometry existed before the building itself. The God hypothesis is nothing more than an attempt to mystify this simple truth.
If mathematics is just a human invention, how is it that it can predict the behavior of black holes or the movements of subatomic particles, which are independent of our minds, with millimetric precision even before they are discovered? As Eugene Wigner said, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences can only be explained by a rational design of the universe. Numbers and the laws of logic are immaterial. You cannot find them in a laboratory, nor can you weigh them, but they rule the physical world. The fact that these immaterial laws rule the material world so perfectly is the purest evidence that the universe was designed by a mind, God. The human mind can understand the universe because both are products of the same rational source. If everything were a blind coincidence, as Blue Glass says, we could not even trust the accuracy of our thoughts, because our thoughts would be nothing but chemical reactions focused solely on survival. Our desire to seek the truth leads us to that absolute truth, that is, to God.
Finally, let's come to life. How life arose from inanimate matter, abiogenesis, is a subject that science has not yet fully solved, but has taken giant steps toward. Filling this gap with God is to return to the ignorance of ancient ages. The RNA world hypothesis and chemical processes in hydrothermal vents show that life is a chemistry that can self-organize. DNA is indeed a massive information store. However, this information is not the product of an author, but data accumulated by environmental selection. The universe is billions of years old and contains trillions of galaxies. On this massive scale, the beginning of life under suitable conditions is not a miracle, but a statistical probability. Life does not need to have a meaning. Life is just a form of matter that tends to exist and replicate. Our duty is not to search for this meaning outside, but to create it within ourselves. Science has told us how we are. We will decide what we will become. Saying goodbye to God is man stepping into adulthood.
Blue Glass speaks of statistical probability, but mathematically, the probability of even the simplest protein forming randomly is greater than the age of the universe. Information is in essence distinct from matter. Computer software is independent of hardware and requires an encoder. That immense data in DNA is the product of an intelligence, because information can only arise from a will. Inanimate matter cannot say to itself, "I must survive." This will is the divine breath at the core of life. We are not just replicated molecules. We are souls who question the universe, make sacrifices, produce art, and ask, why? The world of blue glass promises a cold silence and a final nothingness. The God I defend, however, is the source of being who makes our every moment meaningful, answers our every search for justice, and sees us not as machines, but as interlocutors. The universe is a magnificent poem, written by the pen of an author, and we are the only verses capable of reading that poem. God is at the very center of the meaning of everything, just as he was at the beginning of everything. We have come to the end of this debate, where fundamental ideas clashed. Blue glass defended the light of science and the sufficiency of matter. Redwise defended the mystery of consciousness and the meaning of existence. The decision belongs to you, those who breathe and think in this universe. I hope that our differences keep us together and add color to life. Thanks for watching.